Your soulmate is already married, but what they did next will shock you. My beloved child, hold your thoughts for just one moment, because the story unfolding around your heart is far more unusual than it first appears. What you are about to hear is not about chasing someone, forcing fate, or waiting endlessly. It is about seeing what most people never notice, the hidden movement of destiny behind ordinary moments. And today's message begins with a truth that almost no one expects. There is someone whose life appears completely settled from the outside. Every photograph tells one story. Every conversation confirms the same picture. Every person around them believes their future has already been decided. Yet appearances have never been the final chapter. Sometimes the loudest certainty hides the quietest transformation. You may have wondered why certain feelings refuse to disappear even after so much time has passed. Why certain moments return to your memory without invitation. Why your intuition keeps whispering that something unfinished still exists beyond what your eyes can see. Stay with this thought, because what comes next may connect pieces you never realized belonged together. Imagine standing before two roads. One looks complete. The other has not even been discovered yet. Most people choose the road that everyone else approves of. Very few recognize the invisible path quietly waiting beside it. That is where unexpected change often begins, not with noise, but with a single realization that arrives without warning. The person connected to this message reached such a moment. Their life continued exactly as expected, until one ordinary day became unforgettable. There was no dramatic announcement. No impossible coincidence. Only one conversation, one unexpected reflection, one silent question they could no longer ignore. What if the life everyone believes is perfect is not the life my heart truly understands? That question echoed deeper than anyone around them could hear. Do not rush past this part. Questions like these do not appear without reason. They arrive only when a person's inner world begins changing long before their outer world does. That is why the greatest turning points often remain invisible until everything suddenly makes sense. You may think this message is about another person's journey. Look again. Perhaps it is also revealing something about your own patience. Because destiny rarely works through speed. It works through preparation. While people become distracted by timelines, something greater prepares the exact moment when truth can finally be recognized. The remarkable part is this. The person everyone assumed had already written the final page of their story quietly began reading an entirely different chapter within themselves. No one noticed. Their closest circle continued smiling. Daily routines continued unchanged. The calendar moved forward exactly as before. But inside, everything had begun shifting. Sometimes the strongest transformation is completely silent. Like winter preparing spring. Like sunrise before anyone opens their eyes. Like a seed growing where no one thinks to look. And what happened next surprised even them. Instead of running away from confusion, they chose something almost nobody chooses anymore. They became honest with themselves. Not with the world. Not with social expectations. Not with fear. With themselves. That single decision changed the direction of every thought that followed. Pause here for a second. How many lives continue simply because people are afraid to admit what they truly feel? How many opportunities disappear because everyone believes yesterday must always decide tomorrow? The answer is more than most people realize. That is why this story matters. It is not encouraging impossible expectations. It is revealing that authentic change always begins within, long before anyone else notices it outside. As the days passed, they stopped pretending that unanswered questions would somehow disappear. Instead, they started observing every emotion with unusual clarity. Every memory carried new meaning. Every unexpected encounter felt like another piece of a puzzle slowly revealing its image. The strange part. The more honest they became, the calmer they appeared. While everyone assumed nothing was changing, everything was changing. You may wonder why this matters to you. Because sometimes life places another person's awakening in front of you not as a promise, but as a reminder. A reminder that no chapter remains frozen forever. A reminder that certainty can transform into possibility. A reminder that tomorrow often begins long before tomorrow actually arrives. Stay a little longer. The next piece of this story reveals the decision they made after accepting this truth, a decision so unexpected that nobody around them saw it coming. And when that moment finally arrived, it did not just surprise one person. It quietly changed the direction of every life connected to it. Every path reaches a moment when silence becomes louder than words, and this was that moment. What happened next was not impulsive, dramatic, or reckless. It unfolded with remarkable calm, as though life itself had been waiting for the right second to reveal another layer of the story. If you listen closely, you may recognize something that mirrors your own journey. Days turned into weeks, yet one thought refused to fade. The more they tried to focus on ordinary routines, the more they realized they were no longer living on autopilot. Every sunrise carried a different feeling. Every familiar place seemed to ask the same quiet question. What kind of life truly reflects who you are becoming? That question stayed with them. Most people expect life-changing moments to arrive with noise. But real transformation often enters gently. It doesn't knock down the door, it waits until someone is finally ready to open it. And then, instead of making a rushed decision, they chose something far more unexpected. They stepped back. Not away from responsibility. Not away from kindness. But away from pretending. For the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to examine every choice without the pressure of pleasing everyone else. It was uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar. Yet it also brought a strange sense of peace. Have you ever noticed how clarity often arrives after we stop forcing answers? That is exactly what happened. The future they once believed was already written suddenly looked different, not because the world had changed overnight, but because their perspective had. One evening, while reflecting on everything they had carried inside, they understood something that reshaped their thinking forever. Life is not measured by appearances. It is measured by authenticity. That realization became the turning point. Stay with this story. The next few moments reveal why the title of this message carries so much weight. Instead of hiding behind expectations, they began having honest conversations with the people who mattered most. They spoke with respect. They listened more than they talked. They stopped making decisions based only on fear of disappointing others. Surprisingly, those conversations created understanding where they had expected resistance. Not every answer appeared immediately. Not every road became simple. But every truthful step replaced confusion with clarity. That is how genuine change begins. Quietly. Patiently. One sincere decision at a time. Perhaps this message found you today because you've been waiting for certainty before taking your own next step. Yet certainty rarely arrives first. Awareness does. Then courage follows. Then direction becomes visible. Take a moment and ask yourself, what truth have you been postponing simply because it feels unfamiliar? Sometimes the smallest honest answer becomes the beginning of an entirely different future. If this story has sparked something meaningful inside you, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what part connected with you the most. Your thoughts may encourage someone else who happens to read them. And if these kinds of cinematic journeys speak to your heart, you're always welcome to stay connected by subscribing so we can continue exploring stories like this together. Now the atmosphere around them had completely changed. People noticed a new confidence. A quieter smile. A lighter presence. They couldn't explain exactly what was different. Only that something was. Yet the biggest surprise had not happened. Because someone else, someone who had remained completely unaware of this inner transformation, was about to notice the change as well. That meeting would not happen by accident. It would arrive at the exact moment neither of them expected. Wait until the next chapter. Because when their paths finally crossed again, one simple conversation uncovered a truth that no one could have predicted, and from that moment forward, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Just when it seemed the story had settled into quiet certainty, an unexpected encounter changed everything. Not because of loud words or dramatic gestures, but because a single moment revealed what had been hidden in plain sight all along. This is where the journey takes its most unforgettable turn. The day began like any other. Nothing in the morning hinted that life was preparing a completely different ending than anyone had imagined. People hurried through their routines. Conversations came and went. The world continued moving exactly as it always had. Yet beneath that ordinary surface, invisible pieces were aligning with remarkable precision. Have you ever experienced a moment that felt strangely familiar, as if you had somehow lived it before? That was exactly how it felt. Without planning it. Without expecting it. Their paths crossed again. There was no perfect setting. No carefully arranged meeting. Just two people standing in a moment that somehow felt larger than time itself. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Sometimes silence carries answers that words cannot reach. Then something extraordinary happened. Instead of talking about the past, they spoke about who they had become. The conversation wasn't filled with regret. It wasn't filled with blame. It was filled with honesty. For the first time, neither person tried to impress the other. Neither tried to control the outcome. They simply allowed truth to exist between them. And that changed everything. The person everyone believed had already finished writing their future quietly admitted something they had never shared before. I've spent so much time living the life everyone expected that I almost forgot to ask what truly brings me peace. Those words didn't create chaos. They created clarity. Because genuine honesty has a way of removing confusion without creating conflict. Stay with this moment. What happened next is the reason this story has been leading you here from the very beginning. Instead of making promises, instead of making impossible declarations, they made one meaningful decision. From that day forward, every choice would be guided by authenticity rather than appearances. No pretending. No hidden fears. No living simply to satisfy expectations. That decision surprised everyone around them. Friends noticed it. Family noticed it. Even people who barely knew them could sense that something had shifted. Why? Because real transformation cannot stay hidden forever. Eventually, it shines through every conversation, every expression, every step forward. Perhaps you've been wondering where you fit into this story. Here's the answer. This journey was never meant to convince you that someone else's future determines your own. It was meant to remind you that life is constantly unfolding in ways we cannot fully predict. The chapters ahead are shaped less by fear, and more by the courage to become honest with yourself. Think about that for a moment. How many beautiful possibilities remain unseen simply because people assume today's circumstances can never change? Far too many. Yet every meaningful transformation begins with one person choosing truth over comfort. As the seasons continued to change, so did everything surrounding this remarkable story. Doors that once seemed permanently closed slowly began opening. Conversations that once felt impossible became natural. Peace replaced uncertainty. And hope quietly took the place of hesitation. That is the hidden surprise behind today's title. The greatest shock was never about someone's relationship status. It was about the unexpected courage to stop living by appearances and start living with authenticity. Perhaps that is why this message found you today. Not to predict your future, but to remind you that every new chapter begins with one honest decision. And sometimes, the moment you believe the story is already finished, life gently turns the page and reveals that the most meaningful chapter has only just begun. What if the ending you imagined was never the real ending at all, but only the doorway to something far greater? Stay with this final chapter, because every piece of the story has been leading here. Time has a remarkable way of revealing what emotion alone cannot. Months passed. The noise faded. Opinions that once seemed overwhelming became distant echoes. The pressure to explain every decision disappeared, replaced by something far more valuable, inner peace. For the first time in years, they were no longer trying to prove anything. Not to strangers. Not to family. Not even to themselves. They simply chose to live each day with honesty. And strangely enough, that quiet confidence became impossible to ignore. People who once believed they knew the entire story suddenly realized they had only seen the cover, never the pages within. One unexpected afternoon, someone asked them a simple question. What changed you? They smiled. Not because they had prepared an answer, but because the answer had become their life. I stopped living according to fear, and started living according to truth. Those words lingered in the air. No dramatic speech followed. No grand announcement. Just a peaceful certainty that everyone around them could feel. This is something many people spend their entire lives searching for. Not the perfect situation. Not universal approval. But the freedom that comes from becoming completely authentic. Perhaps this is why you were meant to hear this message today. Maybe your own story has felt delayed. Maybe you've questioned why certain chapters unfolded the way they did. Yet what if every delay was preparing you to recognize something you would have missed before? Think carefully. Would you rather arrive quickly without understanding? Or arrive at the right moment with complete clarity? Life often chooses the second path. That is why patience is never wasted. It quietly builds wisdom while the future is still taking shape. As this journey reached its final pages, one truth became undeniable. The greatest surprise was never that life changed. The greatest surprise was how peacefully it changed once honesty became the foundation. Sometimes the miracle isn't a sudden event. Sometimes the miracle is becoming the kind of person who no longer fears whatever comes next. And that is where real freedom begins. Before this story comes to a close, if it made you pause, reflect, or see life from a different perspective, feel free to share it with someone who might need these words today. I'd also love to read your thoughts in the comments, and if these cinematic journeys inspire you, you're always welcome to subscribe and continue the next chapter with us. Now take one final thought with you. Never assume that someone else's life, or even your own, is completely defined by what you see today. Every person carries unseen chapters. Every heart holds untold conversations. Every future contains possibilities that remain invisible until the perfect moment arrives. So walk forward with hope. Choose truth over appearances. Choose patience over panic. Choose authenticity over expectation. Because the most unforgettable stories are never the ones that begin perfectly. They are the ones where ordinary people find extraordinary courage when no one expects it. And perhaps, without realizing it, your own next chapter has already begun. There is one final mystery that few people ever recognize. The moment after everything changes is often the moment when life quietly begins testing whether that change is real. Listen closely, because this chapter is not about coincidence, it is about what happens when a transformed heart meets an unexpected future. The weeks that followed were unlike anything either of them had imagined. Nothing happened overnight. There were no perfect shortcuts. No magical solutions. Instead, every day presented a new opportunity to choose the same path again. Truth. Patience. Authenticity. These were no longer beautiful words. They had become daily decisions. And that is what made the difference. One morning, while watching the world awaken around them, a simple realization appeared without warning. The greatest victories are often invisible. No audience applauds them. No headlines announce them. Yet they quietly reshape an entire life. That thought stayed with them. Because they finally understood something that had escaped them for years. Real peace is not found when every question is answered. It is found when you stop allowing unanswered questions to control your heart. Pause for a moment. How much energy do people spend trying to predict tomorrow? And how often does tomorrow arrive in a completely different way than expected? Life has always carried beautiful surprises for those willing to remain open to them. As this new season unfolded, opportunities began appearing where obstacles once seemed permanent. New conversations. New friendships. New perspectives. Even familiar places felt different because they were seeing them through different eyes. It wasn't the world that had changed first. It was the person looking at it. That is a truth worth remembering. When your perspective grows, your possibilities grow with it. Perhaps that is why this story found you today. Not to tell you exactly what your future will look like, but to remind you that your future is still being written. Every kind decision, every patient moment, every honest conversation, every quiet act of courage, they all become sentences in a chapter that does not yet exist. Never underestimate the power of today's choices. Years from now, they may become the very moments you look back on with gratitude. And then, something happened that neither of them expected. Looking back, they realized they were no longer focused on what had once seemed impossible. Instead, they had become grateful for how much they themselves had grown. That was the real surprise. Not the circumstances. Not the timing. But the transformation. Sometimes we spend so much time waiting for life to change around us that we fail to notice the incredible change happening within us. And once that inner change becomes complete, the outer world often begins reflecting it in ways we never could have planned. So as this story gently fades into its final silence, carry one thought with you. Do not judge your journey by today's appearance alone. Some chapters look ordinary while they are quietly preparing extraordinary endings. Some answers arrive only after patience has done its hidden